Welcome to r/AskReddit Lawyers of Reddit. Have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose, and why? Not quite, but I did a trial where I won, and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job, and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough, because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present, so it left me feeling weird. On the regular, honestly, if I wasn't rooting for my client to lose, corporate litigation mostly never worked alone. By the time I was done working with them, I considered it a small victory. This was the main reason I'm what they call a recovering attorney now. Oh yes. A high maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit. We see she was going to have to pay $60 a month in child support. She wanted a recalculation, and I was praying she would have to pay more. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER, he took the kid to a chiropractor, tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip, kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults, and especially the elderly, can get. Close bracket. So my friend does some extra negotiating and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. But his client doesn't realize, until after the papers were signed, that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of shit. I worked at a civil firm, and our biggest client for a while was a real estate investor who was the most unpleasant asshole I've ever met. His favorite scheme was buying distressed properties, translation, unlivable shitholes, at foreclosure sales, selling them on credit to people who couldn't afford to purchase a house any other way, waiting for the buyer to fix the place up with their own money, and then finding an excuse to foreclose on them so he could buy the place back and sell it for more to somebody else. As you can imagine, this is wildly illegal and got him sued by many people. And trying to defend this indefensible asshole against the people he screwed was a nightmare, but I desperately needed the job. We dropped him as a client when he stopped paying his bills, and I hope he winds up behind bars or bankrupt. Edit. Finding an excuse absolutely encompasses fabricating an excuse. Family lawyer here, associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had more, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DSCS had been called, but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. I'm a divorce attorney. There are several people I've represented who aren't dangerous, but are pretty shitty parents. It's hard to help them fight for their kids without also fighting for them to be better parents. Fortunately, I live in a state where that kind of advice is allowed. Otherwise, I'd want many of my clients to lose. The public defender. Definitely yes. Raped his own children. This post applies to several people I defended. Not really. If I for some reason can't stand someone, I'm not taking their case. Once I do represent someone, I begin to identify with his side and his version of the story. There's some psychological mechanism behind it that once you take a position, you'll go to great lengths to justify this position both to yourself and to others. Don't know the English term for that. That's a bias you need to be aware of in order to calculate the risk for your client, because you tend to overestimate your chances of winning a dispute/lawsuit once you found arguments for the case. A serial killer murdered a locally famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his murder, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years. The client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They are both on the title. They split up, and she leaves a property that is literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a God, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with, that is worth 600k might be hers, because a serial killer murdered the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case. Not a lawyer, but I used to be a Lyft driver and drove a group of lawyers to a strip club once. One of them told me about a case he did earlier in the year. The guy was on trial for murder and rape. The dude was apparently crazy as fuck and nobody doubted he was guilty. He was actually chained to a chair with a mask on, Hannibal Lecter style. His job was to try to get him off. He said he would try his hardest to get him to walk, but prayed to whatever God was listening that he would fucking lose. The guy got life with no chance of parole. He was relieved, but then switched to a different law firm. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction to save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases I'm rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. Man, you win some, you lose some. Or if client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or, in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon, so that he'll pay up and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. And speaking of, if I'm working a case where client has unreasonable demands or expectations and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an asshole. Not me, but my mom had this case like 6 years ago where she had to defend a man who killed his ex-girlfriend's 1-day-old baby. I remember my mom would come home every day and just cry. She's had a lot of cases where horrible things happen to kids and she's always been so afraid something would happen to my brother or me. It really took a toll on her. All the time. I do family and criminal law. Custody cases are the worst, because an intense one means at least one of the parents isn't actually concerned about the well-being of the child. They just want to win. I will always represent my client and their interests, but it is certainly difficult some days. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care or hope they'll lose. For example, if you're a public defender and you're defending some sort of rapist, pedophile, etc., you really hope they lose, or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the shittiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a rapist and sadly many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a PD are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and the win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose in the fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure a defendant's rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution side, there are sometimes pressures from the public, victims, etc. to get a conviction on someone, especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this, or smaller cases, where they're thinking this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute, and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose. Unless they are getting paid on contingency, then they absolutely want to win. I take appointments representing complete shitbag parents who lose their kids to DCS. The system in my state is really set up to help these people, but almost always they're awful and the kids deserve better. Not always, but so often it's really demoralizing sometimes. Immigration attorney had a client sign up after having his visa cancelled as he was convicted for molesting his ex-partner's kid. I wasn't in a position in my firm to refuse clients because I'm a junior and senior attorneys would go nuts. We had multiple risk assessments since his offending, saying he was the lowest of low risk and testimony that he wasn't a pedophile. Got his visa back for him. Still don't know how I feel about it. I didn't want him to lose the case Peresi, I just wasn't expecting it to be successful. I used to do plaintiff's work in credit card debt collection cases. Yes, I was that asshole. One time we were suing a guy for $3K. He had some type of cancer of the throat and had one of his jawbones removed. He was in really bad shape. Prior to the hearing, the guy told me he quit paying when his wife left his shit. Couldn't deal with his cancer. Also, his church had collected all they could to help him. $1K in cash. Also, he said he was judgment proof, which means he's so poor that there was no way my client would ever see any money from him. Extremely common. I called back to the office with his proposed $1K to satisfy the debt in full, and my boss said, I don't give a fuck about his jawbone. Tell him $2K or no deal. The trial was brutal. He broke down crying when I got him to admit he intentionally didn't pay his credit card bills due to his medical bills. He was clearly broken. I pitied the guy so much but still did my job and won. We got the full $3K in our judgment. BTW, our client was a third party debt buyer, meaning they bought the debt for $0 to $1.00 of debt. This means that our client was rewarded $3K plus court costs plus attorney's fees for something they paid $60 for and will never be able to collect on. P.S. Missing jawbone aside, this pathetic scenario was / is not at all uncommon. Thank you for making to the end. If you like the video, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.